Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how I change my sketches up and move them into a more kind of formal painting. So if we had a quick look at my sketchbook, here you can see the designs that I've done while I've been out and about. So these are the sketches that I made in location on the beach. And then I've created some watercolour, mini watercolours, just to see how the images would work as a fuller painting. And I'm going to show you how I produce these 4 images from this sketch in this video. So as you can see, I have taped down 4 pieces of watercolour paper. These are just offcuts from paper that I've kind of cut up. And I'm using a HB pencil here, and I'm just lightly sketching in her horizon line and putting in the trees. I'm quite literally copying the image that I sketched while I was on location. As I'm drawing, I may be making some decisions on whether or not I want to change some of the scene, make it make a bit more sense. But I think in this instance, all I'm doing is creating a copy of that image. You'll notice I'm using the pencil by gripping it at the very end. I'm not holding it near the pointy bit. And this is to give me I guess less control over what I'm doing, which makes for a more interesting image when you're drawing. And I'm very carefully and very lightly painting and drawing this in. Drawing it in. You'll see there I made a quick line for the horizon, and I just want to put the heads of the figures on that horizon line. I'm just measuring across again, putting my head in and then putting a smaller figure, making it look a bit further away than the ones that I first draw there. Again, just finding the horizon line, putting a dot in for the head, and then bringing a kind of a carrot shape down, which will indicate people in this instance. That's pretty much that first picture drawn in, really. Not too much to add to that, just very basic shapes, as you can see. Really not too much fussing about. Just a very quick image there, very quick transfer of the drawing. Moving on to the bottom panel now. This was a picture of a guy who was pumping up one of those sort of inflatable ski boat type, well, not ski boats, but you know, a sort of a float device for the sea. So I'm drawing in the figure here very lightly, trying to get the lines slightly more accurate than the actual sketch that I draw on site, trying to add a few more gaps to indicate where the person is standing. I started off with an horizon line again, just somewhere, just so that I know where to start the line work. I'm working down his shorts and legs now, pushing one leg out to the side and adding some of the air pump. And this is where I will start to make some decisions. So on my original image, the flotation device goes off the edge of the page. I made it slightly smaller and moved the character across so that I can fit it in a little better. I'm able to then put in the horizon line and also some of the shadow of the boat and the man as the sun was sort of coming from the left of the picture, and just adding some landmass there just to highlight the guy when we start to paint him in a minute. On the top right now, I'm just drawing my horizon line, and this is an image of the coast restaurant that sits on one of the beaches between Saundersfoot and Wiseman Bay Beach in Wales. I'm not sure that this image is ever going to be successful as a painting, but I always think it's worthwhile giving it a go in watercolour just to see what might happen. And I'm just drawing in very rough shapes, really, translating them from the sketch that I did when I was on the beach looking back at the restaurant, adding in sort of perhaps a little bit more detail for the windows than what was actually in the image, and just working my way across there, giving a little bit of perspective on some of the lines, adding sort of lines that perhaps aren't in the sketch. I'm kind of, I guess I'm redrawing this, but at the same time I'm trying to make it look like the image that I sketched while I was on the beach. So it's kind of a difficult thing to do, really. I guess explain what's going on here, but yeah, this is how I normally work. I will do a sketch on site and then kind of think about what might need to happen to it. So I put a big bush on the right hand side of this page and some little bits of line work to indicate the stones and pebbles that are on the top of the beach. And then finally, working down to the final image on the bottom right, I'm going to put a very low horizon line on here. And this is a picture of Saundersfoot Harbour, pretty much at high tide, and it's kind of also what interested me in this picture was the light, and you can see that there's a shaft of light coming from the top left of the image down to where there is the dock of Saundersfoot Harbour. And that's really what I wanted in this picture. So this painting, I will aim to try and make that detail come alive when I start to use the watercolour. And I'm just putting the dome here of that odd little tower that's, I suppose, a watchtower on the beach, and a flag pole as well. I'm holding the pencil slightly lower down in this drawing because it's more detailed, and I kind of know what I'm doing here with the shapes. This really is just a painting to see if this will work and I can get the sky the way I want it. Adding in some detail now for some of the stonework on the sort of the dock of the bay, and also some indication of shadow lines in the water. And there was a sort of a wonderful image of a boy as well, so we'll try and highlight that in this picture when we start to paint it. And there you go, that's all the drawing done now. And so the exciting bit, adding watercolour to these images. The nice thing about having 4 images in front of you is you can work your way round, and by the time you've finished the last one, you can start going back into the first one. And I'll probably hit these paintings 3 times. You'll notice I'm using a very, very big brush here, particularly for the size of the paper. The paper's only about 2.5 inches by 3 inches, and this is a really big brush. And all I'm trying to do in these images is create a feeling, a mood. How did the weather make me feel? And I'm using some Cobolt Blue here just to put in the skyline. I've gone over some of the background, over the trees. I'm not too worried about that. I've used some dry brush to kind of get some sparkle in those top trees. I'm adding in the sea now, slightly more mix of blue into the paint to give it a bit more strength as I'm painting the sea in. And what I'm going to do now is paint in immediately the beach and let the 2 colours mingle and merge together, adding a little bit of separation there, and then just dragging the colour back down the beach. And you'll see that the sea is now sort of creeping on the beach. It looks like it's kind of blended there. And just doing a little bit of lifting out there with some water, just letting some of the colour drip back in, and a little bit of red on the corner just to add just some depth, really. Again, I'm going to remove that, but at the same time sort of blend it into the yellow sand, because you do get that separation on the beach where the tide has just gone out and the water leaves a kind of a darker area of sand. Working down to the next image now, putting the same blue mix of Cobolt Blue into the sky. Ooh, a little bit of a mark on the top there. You can leave that, but I always like to kind of mop them out if I can. I'm now going to go down into the water, and I'm really just bringing the paint down. I'm not using extra paint here. I've just got a wet brush, and I'm just bringing the paint down, moving the sea from the sky all the way down. Again, using the same colours here. This is Quinacridone Gold with a little bit of Windsor Yellow in it. And I'm just going to brush that over and let the sea again just gently merge with the sand and come all the way down the image. Adding just a slight red tone to the bottom of the beach, so it sort of seems to make a painting sit better if you have a sort of a darker bottom to the image. And we're going to move on now, mixing a little bit more of the blue paint so that I can put the sky in for the picture of the restaurant. As you can see, the paint's starting to get a little bit light, and that's why I added some of the blue. And the nice thing again with a painting of this size, you can really just add the paint where you want it. So I've put some paint through the windows of the restaurant, working from top to bottom, adding a little bit of green. The green will be made from the same colours, so Quinacridone Gold and Cobolt Blue, just mixed on the palette, and then just very quickly added onto the page. As you see, it's a very wet mix of watercolour. I like to keep my colours kind of as fluid as I can, but also with as much pigment as I need for each layer. Making a sort of a grey colour now that I'll use on the buildings at some point, and also into the rocks. And the grey is usually made from permanent rose and Cobolt Blue, which you can see I'm mixing, trying to get the correct strength. There'll also be a little hint of the Quinacridone Gold in there. And as you can see, that colour, although it's quite dark on the palette, it actually comes through very light when I apply it to the watercolour paper. And you can see with this big brush, even though it's a really big brush, I'm able to still make some quite fine paint marks on the paper, not being forced to make big brush marks at this stage, just some sort of little light marks. And then finally, smacking the beach in, if you can do that with watercolour. And again, you can see all the colours are starting to merge down from the top, and also a little bit of dark on the bottom of the beach, just to help that image there. We're going to move on in a minute to the bottom image, which again, it's the same thing. We'll start at the top of the picture, work our way down, start with the blues, move through to the yellows, and then add some reds to the image. And I'm just filling in some of the... I do get fiddly with these. I don't like to get fiddly, but I have got a little bit of fiddle. And you can see I've left quite a lot of white paper showing on that particular image. All right, we're going to move into the final image, and I'm starting with the grey colour that I mixed up for the buildings. This picture was painted on a very sort of wet day in Wales. Yeah, I know you can't believe it, but yes, it was a wet day in Wales. And I'm sort of carefully painting around the flag and around the edge of the building. And what I'm trying to do is create the same marks that are in my sketch, the sort of the shaft of light coming from the top left and going behind the bay, and adding some sort of blue sky between the clouds to sort of show that that sort of shaft of light. Again, letting the paint mix on the paper. Kind of one of my favourite things to do really is to mix the paint on the paper rather than in the palette. It looks sort of more natural, and we'll be hitting this painting again, so we will start to add a bit more definition to some of these areas, and you'll see what I mean when we go back for stage 2 in a few moments time. Adding in some sea again, it's kind of a mix of the blue and the grey. It was a very grey day in Wales, dragging that through all the way through the painting. The brush itself will tidy up any sort of spillages of paint that I don't want, so anything which does merge and I don't want it to merge, I can lift that out with my big brush. And the image is almost there now, just adding in some Quinacridone Gold on the brickwork of the dock. And as you can see at this point, everything has merged together and you can't really tell what's what, but it's kind of the way I paint. And I think if you give it a try, you'll find that you'll when you come back and do the next stage, you'll have a nice underpainting to paint over. So in this next stage of the painting, I'll probably work across all 4 images at once, because I've painted in and blocked in the big areas. And now what I'll do is I'll start to mix colour that I want to put across all the images. And I'm going to start very much with the background now. As you can see, the colours are still quite strong in the palette, and what I'm putting in is the background hills and detail. Just kind of bringing the brush across and bringing it down. You'll see the blue is still reflecting through from the first washes, and this is a kind of a bluey grey greeny mix that I've created just to create those distant hills in the past. And at the edge there, you'll see I'm starting to paint up to the rocks, and thus I'm by not painting them, I've actually painted the edge of the rocks, if you see what I mean. And something that I do quite a bit, just bring in some more paint to bring in the horizon line down to the bottom of the page. And just that wipe out there is just to take some of the excess watercolour away, so you don't start to get run backs when you're painting. I'm going to move into the bottom painting now and add in something that probably isn't in the sketch. This is what I mean when I start to do things which probably aren't in the first sketch. I'm trying to paint around the figure here to highlight the figure, and I'm putting the hill in behind him. So by putting the hill in, again, I'm actually painting there and highlighting the back of the character. So sort of, yeah, negatively painting him in, if you like, and adding some grey now to the blue mix that I was adding, and just bringing those rocks across. And you can start to see the picture forming at this. I like to see that, really, when you're doing this. You like to see the picture forming as you're creating these washes. Taking some more grey paint now, and just adding a little bit of warmth with some red to the mix. As these colours have not changed since the first wash I put down. And now I'm positively painting the restaurant, the coast restaurant, into the image now. Working my way round the building, adding in some darks to the bottom, but mainly trying to build up the buildings, and the bottom of the building will become kind of a lost and found edge, really, to the rest of the work. And that's what benefits by having this underwash on the painting, is that when you do paint down to the edges, there's still, instead of white paper being visible, you've got your other painted lines. Negatively painting in the bushes now with the rocks, just adding the rocks and the stairs that lead down to the beach, and just dotting about here because the light on the rocks will be reflecting off in different angles, so I'm not worried about painting the whole thing in as a full wash, rather just sort of dotting about to get the image in the state that I want it to be. We're going to move down into the final image now, and what I'm trying to do here is recreate the shaft of light. As you can see, I've lost it a little bit where the washes have all merged, but this is the beauty of this technique of overwashing washes. I can now start to put that skyline back in and give myself that shaft of light coming down the image, negatively painting in the harbour wall there, but very carefully painting in that dark piece of sky, which is going to create the shaft of light, which you'll then be able to see the harbour wall as we start to paint. Coming all the way down the page now on the left hand side of the painting, and negatively painting in those rocks that are out at the sea, that you can see just beyond the harbour wall. Again, using the same mix of colours. There's no new colours here. This is just the same grey mix, using Permanent Rose and Cobolt Blue. Just adding in some little lines now just to help bring the eye down to where I want it to kind of rest for the viewer. And you can start to see now that the images at this point start to come alive, and you can start to see where you do need to do extra work to make the image stand out from the background. when you're painting, particularly in this manner. I'm going to bring back in the rocks, the stonework that I drew in at the beginning of this sketch, and you can see in the sketch I did on site, you can see the dark rocks at the bottom and also down the side of the harbour wall. And this again will help to pick out some of the detail in the background, and also allow us to start considering the light and the dark side of the image, particularly where I'm painting the little tower in on the edge, on the end of the harbour wall. And I'm just using some of that mixture again in the reflected shadow that's at the bottom of the harbour wall. I think this is probably one of the more complex images of the four to actually try and get right. And I really didn't like those rocks being part of the reflection, so I just took a little piece of tissue paper there and mopped it out. So I think finally through these images now, I'm just going to put the green of the trees in the image on the top left. Just, it needs something. I was going to leave it with those trees, but just going to go back into them now, just dotting around some of the colour on the top of the tree, leaving some of the original wash showing underneath, but trying to create some interesting shapes here, but not trying to fill the image in. So it's kind of a tricky balance really, and something I guess you just kind of get used to doing, adding in a stroke of green there for the grass that was in front of the restaurant but before the beach. And also adding in some of the trees, and you'll see I'm using the side of the brush rather than the tip of the brush when I'm painting in trees. It just kind of gives you a more jaggedy, bottomy edge for your trees. I'm going to pull down some of the trunks of the trees into the top of the cliff there, and you'll see that there's a little bit of light showing through between each of the tree trunks, which is kind of what I saw and is in the image in the top left, but perhaps not as prominent as in the watercolour, which is why I do these images and make changes. So I'm going to work my way back through these images again now. You can see all the paint is dry, and it really needs to make sure the paint is dry before you start back into these images, otherwise things will get very mixed up and washy very quickly. Change my brush now to a slightly smaller brush as well, and I'm holding it differently. I'm right at the tip of the brush because I'm putting in, I guess, detail now. You'll notice I'm painting in the rocks at a sort of diagonal angle, not painting in as a flat wash, just some diagonal lines, and then adding some more watercolour back into the image. You'll see that's why I left that piece of white space on the image originally, so that I can add some sort of rock structures into that image. I'm going to work my way over the image now, sort of a greeny grey mix, going round the figures that are on the beach to hopefully negatively paint them in, bringing down the colour from the top of the cliff, and then adding in some of that lovely grey again between the figures, to sort of give you the impression of the rock face that was behind the figures in the original painting. Although the painting in the top is fairly colourless, the watercolour isn't. Just a strike of Quinacridone Gold there on the edge of the sand there, that dark strip of sand as the tide goes out, just replacing that, making that more prominent after the watercolour has dried. I'm in an R in about whether or not to put some more blue sea in, and just gently using the side of the brush, going up to the wet edge of the Quinacridone Gold again, using a little bit of water just to mix the two together, but it gives a good impression of a tide coming in and going out, and that's what I wanted to get there. So there you go, that lovely bit of dark sand, and then the sea flowing across the picture. Same kind of job here really, just delineating the sand from the sea. Nice bit of dark sand there where the tide has kind of rippled up against it. And then again some blue lines just to suggest some waves happening in the picture. They weren't really in the image that I drew on location, but I feel they should have been there. And this is all kind of part of my process. I'm not really looking at the images. I'm just using my sketches and trying to make them make sense in these little pictures, deciding if that's the way to go, if it's going to make a proper image when or if I want to create this as a bigger painting. The colours again I'm using here, all the colours that are in the palette already. No new paint mixes have been made. This is just revitalising the colours in the palette, which again are Permanent Rose, Ultramarine Blue and Quinacridone Gold, and a small amount of Windsor Yellow. Using the Quinacridone Gold there to put in the shadow under the man and also the boat. Just a couple of wiggly lines to indicate his reflection on the sand and the kind of direction of the sun, I guess, in this image. As you can see, the painting that I did before has made a lovely sort of cutout of his shirt, and I'm just painting in the top of his flotation thing. I wish I knew what these were called, but there's the sort of surfboards that you use, and you have a paddleboard, that's what they're called. So just painting in the top of his paddleboard and the pump that he was using to blow up the paddleboard. I'm going to be using some grey mix now just on the bottom of the paddleboard, and that's going to mingle in and mix with the Quinacridone Gold shadow that I put in just a few moments ago. It's kind of, I like doing these sort of smaller images. They kind of work really well for me. Adding some dark now on his t-shirt, just a dark sleeve. He's wearing a white t-shirt, but I thought I'd put a dark kind of sleeve on him. Sometimes you get those kind of shirts, don't you, where there's kind of a bit of colour on the white. And adding in some shadow now as the sun is coming down from the right hand side of the picture. So we've got a pair of blue shorts down, and his white t-shirt is really standing out now. I'm just using a damp brush just to add some colour to the t-shirt, just to make it a bit more of a colour rather than white. White tends to be a bit stark sometimes. Bit of Quinacridone Gold for his arms, head and legs. Again, using the small brush, just making a very quick mark, not fussing over this, just a quick mark, deciding where it's going to go and popping it in. And I think that's kind of some of the joy around these images as well. You don't have to think too much. I'm adding in a blue shadow now for the harbour wall in the bottom picture. Originally I did put that in Quinacridone Gold, but it didn't work, so a nice dark kind of colour through there. Also adding a little bit of delineation for the rocks by adding just a couple of light blue waves, I guess they could be. Some more wiggly lines and just some little indications that something's moving in the water. It's not all still. It's not bad night, but not a good night. Just a little bit of movement in those waves. A little bit of red now, bright red. This is Windsor Red. That's for the little boy that's in the water, bobbing about. And also something on the flag just to take away some of the whiteness on the picture. I do like a little bit of white flecks through the painting, but sometimes it can be a little bit harsh, so just a little bit of colour on there. Adding some shadows now to the little tower on the end of the harbour wall, being careful to make sure that the shaft of light is on the left and showing through, and then anything that will be blocked by shadow is actually in shadow. So just trying to be wary really of where the shadows are. But again, this is Quinacridone Gold, creating those shadows, not using any particular shadow colour, just the same colour that's already there. And it's nice with the background wash there that you can do that and still see your kind of previous washes. Adding the dark dome now and the flagpole, using the small brush. Oh, a bit of a yawn there, apologise. It's been a very long weekend. Going into the base of the rocks now, just creating some shadow lines really from those trees that were overhanging the rocks. Adds a bit of separation between the two blocks of colours. Also put some shadows on the stairs in that image, and just some little flecks of something in the rocks to indicate that there's something there. I'm not quite sure what, but it's definitely got some reflections happening in the image. So I'd like to do this as well, just add some sort of random, when you've got a big open space, just some random lines. It just seems to break up the space a bit, and if you put the lines at different angles, it makes the viewer think, oh, what's going on here? Where's my eye meant to be looking? And I like to use that as a lead-in device really on the image. Adding in some more detail and darker sides to those buildings. This is the Coast restaurant down in Wales. We quite like going there. It's expensive but nice. It has a little bit expensive but nice sometimes, haven't you? Adding in some more green into the bushes there, just to make them look a bit more three-dimensional rather than one big long flat colour, which can be a little bit boring. So just adding in some dark to separate the trees out. Moving on to the top left image, I'm doing the same again here, just adding some darks to the bottoms of the trees where they're in shadow and the sun hasn't quite managed to get down that far. Little straight lines, twigs and things. An indication of, and just re-establishing the dark of the cliff there. Probably a bit too near in tone to the background. If you I could just did there, wiped it in with some fresh water. It just takes away that heavy line, and it seems to work. Adding in some more darks into the rock area of the beach, again just to give it a bit more depth and to show it up in a much better way. So the rocks are starting to work now. You can see the images are starting to build. Everything is dry and it's a lovely way to work. Some shadows on the people there, and just re-establishing some sort of darkness in this the foreground here, just to help the eye around the image. It was all sort of seeming a bit flat when I sort of took a step back to look at it. And I should always suggest doing that. Take a step back from your work and just have a look and assess it. What needs to happen, what doesn't need to happen, how much detail do we need to put in. Adding some more dark now to the man's shorts and clothing on the side furthest away from the sun. We're really into the final stretches of these paintings now. It really is a case of just putting in little detail marks, things that might make the image make a bit more sense. So on the bottom image now, just adding in a deep shadow underneath his paddleboard. Finally remember what the the item is called. Just a nice dark shadow underneath as it's been inflated. It's also first away from the sun, so just suddenly you can see something there now. It wasn't just a mark in the paper. It actually is something. It's a paddleboard now, and strengthening the shadows underneath the man, just going back under with the same colour really, sort of a dark red grey colour, adding some shadows onto the man's legs. Working my way around those sort of darker areas. You can see now that the man is starting to kind of sing a little bit against the background, and the foreground. I'm using my little brush here. It's still a mop brush, but it's a little brush. Allows me to do finer details towards the end of paintings. We're just going to put his shorts in again, just a little sort of blue line there away from the sun, and then just mopping it out with a damp brush. And again, all of a sudden, the man suddenly comes alive. He suddenly stood there where he'd been missing before because there wasn't enough tone in the image. Again, I love painting like this because slowly the details evolve and you can see the image that you were trying to create. Re-establishing the dark underneath the dome on the little tower at the end of the pier, of the not the pier, the harbour wall, adding in some more darks of railings and stuff on the edge there. I'm just re-establishing those blocks of big granite type rock that the harbour is built on, and indicating some just normal sized little stones as well that exist in the harbour wall. The image is again popping out of the page now. Those darks, these final darks, suddenly just make the image come alive. The reflection of the water now, again, suddenly that harbour wall jumps out at you where before it was quite flat and you didn't quite know where it began and ended. The same with the tower. The tower's now away from the sky, but there's this lovely bright white speck on the left hand side of that dome that's working so well on that shaft of light coming down. I wasn't really happy with these rocks, so I'm in an iron about what to do. I'm just putting a nice blue line along the bottom, and even they suddenly pop out of the page now. That single line, it's quite exciting, this, I must say, and it's me who's doing the painting. That lovely shape is just popping out at you now. Those distant hills actually look like distant hills. The top image now is now the problem. Nothing is popping on here. So as I said, the top of that cliff really wasn't working for me. It wasn't dark enough, didn't separate from the background. So adding in a nice dark grassy top to that that cliff, and just an untidy edge where it's not growing straight, and working into that base of the trees. Again, it separates the trees from the background, and you suddenly start to see the different layers and depths of the painting coming alive. I think this is probably the most exciting stage of a painting, when you're finally putting these details in. Adding in some of the people now, some darker marks in the people. I was just going to leave them, but I think just adding them, suddenly they're there. You can't miss them now. There's a load of people on the beach, or a load of lines anyway. The lines are probably people, we don't know. They're too far away really to be able to tell individuals, but we've popped them in. Going over some of the darker tones on the restaurant. I do remember when I drew the image, the fronts of the building were very dark. The sun was coming from behind them and to the right, hence the sort of the lighter colour on the building. Adding in that again, some sort of just really just feeling my way around the painting at this point. Adding in lines and dashes and dots and things just to make the image come alive. You can see the restaurant is really popping out against the green now of the bushes. I'm just adding in a little bit more dark tone under those bushes as they hit the rocks. Again, all these little things are just suddenly, these images are just starting to, in my eyes, come alive now. I can actually see what they are, and they're matching up to the tones that are on the sketches as best that I can. Obviously, I've changed a few things along the way, particularly with the harbour and the buildings towards the back of the picture there, cutouts rather than the dark images that I put in my original sketch. Adding in some more detail on the rocks now just the bases where they would be a little bit darker anyway, where the sea was rubbing up against them as it sort of goes in and out. Moving that line up through the bottom just to delineate it from the beach. I just felt that it needed that help. And that pretty much is it really. Those are the images and how I created them from my sketches. Hope you enjoyed it. So here's the final images as I've painted them. If you found this video helpful, please leave a like. If you're feeling a little bit more daring, then please subscribe to the channel. I'll be bringing you some more of these images and how I created them. And if there's anything you'd like to see or have explained, please leave a comment in the bottom and I will come back to you and give you my thoughts. That's it for now. Thanks for watching. See you next time.